The best way to keep a house free of unwanted guests is to keep it clean and have someone do maintenance from time to time. However, when it comes to living in a really old place, there's not much that one can do. For a homeowner living somewhere in the small city of Germantown, Tennessee, her residency became a nightmare when she discovered unexpected creatures living in her walls. It all started after she began to notice that there was a really loud sound emanating from the walls of her house. At first, she was unsure of what it could be, but after listening to the sound several times, an idea of what could actually be happening inside of her walls came to mind. The woman went to call on an expert, who upon arrival discovered something unlike he'd ever come across before. Now, old houses are of course prone to emitting weird noises. Creaky floorboards, clanky radiators, squeaky door hinges, and so much more. The sound emanating from the walls of this property, however, came from a completely different source. Soon enough, the expert in charge of taking care of the concerned homeowner's problem arrived to the place. He introduced himself as David Glover, also known as the Bartlett Bee Whisperer. It turns out, the owner had determined the intense noise coming from within her walls was in fact the sound of bees buzzing. Thus, she called the one person she thought could help solve her problem in a blink of an eye. Mr. Glover's work had earned him a reputation. He was not only good at it, but he was also known to be considerate when working around bees. In fact, those who ever hired him knew his work was not to simply exterminate bees whenever he encountered them. Instead, he always attempted to relocate the insects, removing them from a person's home, but allowing them to live somewhere else. But why? Well, according to Glover, he does such a thing because he recognizes the importance of bees to our own survival. And the truth is, bees are indeed very important to us humans. Around a third of our food is dependent in some way on bees acting as pollinators. So, if bees ever disappear, humanity would be very different to how we know it now. Mr. Glover was always aware of the importance that bees represent. Therefore, he always did his best to protect the species rather than harm it when attending a job. For years, he gained experience in safely relocating bees to places where they could live peacefully and continue to ensure our own survival as they always have. But even with all his years of experience, what Glover saw in the small city of Germantown during that day in which the concerned homeowner called him was still a surprise. Upon his arrival, Glover started to examine the walls, trying to figure out where exactly the insects were located. First, he used some sort of infrared technology that allowed him to get an idea of where he should start. However, not even the scan could reveal the true size of the hive. Glover was unsure of what to do in the beginning, mostly because he didn't like the idea of being invasive when removing the bees from the house. Unfortunately, he had no choice but to invade bee territory while doing his job. Glover suited up and started to work. He began to take away individual blocks from the wall and ended up discovering something incredible. After 12 lines of blocks had been removed, the true size of the hive was revealed. It turns out that the hive was 3 feet by 5 feet large, and not only that, but there was an estimated 30,000 bees living in it. The discovery led the Bee Whisperer to talk to Fox News in October of 2018. When interviewed, Mr. Glover described how the hive had been there for several years, but upon further examination, he discovered something more. There were also hundreds of dead bees littered around the hive. Of course, this could only mean one thing. Apparently, an exterminator had tried to get rid of the insects with no such success in the past. The substance used to accomplish this goal didn't seem to affect the whole structure though. This time, however, the homeowner expected Mr. Glover to take care of her problem and remove the bees from her property. In a matter of 4 hours, the Bee Whisperer did his job and removed every single one of the bees from the walls. In order to do so, he had to carefully extract the hive by cutting small sections and then placing them in a big box. The owner was more than pleased with Mr. Glover's work. She was no longer going to have to worry about the insects living in her walls. But more importantly, she was now going to be able to sleep peacefully at night. Nevertheless, there was still one more thing to figure out. Mr. Glover had done an excellent job, but still he had removed a large swarm of bees from their home. So where on earth were they going to be relocated? Well, you wouldn't really believe where they ended up. It turns out Mr. Glover had no idea of where to release the bees, so he decided to take them back to his home and let them free in his backyard. Currently, the insects live in Mr. Glover's garden and will continue to remain there until someone else needs them. Perhaps a farmer who needs them for pollination, or a honey producer who's in need of the insects. Either way, the Bee Whisperer lived up to his reputation and allowed the bees to be free in his garden, saving them from probably meeting a tragic end. Thanks to people like him, bees continue to play the role that they've been playing for hundreds of years, and continue to contribute to our own survival.